Okay, let's dive right into this explainer, because today we are unraveling a literal geopolitical crime scene. We're talking about a completely vanished city, a place where one wrong step in the pitch black alleyways could genuinely mean death. A place where addicts roamed and where families who couldn't afford burials were forced to lock away bodies in their own home toilets. I mean, it's incredibly grim. This was the Kowloon Walled City. It existed right there on the map, but absolutely no government actually ruled it.
So, how exactly does a lawless city of 33,000 people just vanish from official history? The sheer scale of the cover-up we're about to investigate is honestly staggering. An entire civilization wiped from the face of the earth and the official records scrubbed completely clean. How does that even happen? And maybe more importantly, why did the world's most powerful empires work together to bury its memory in the dirt?
Part 1. The Impossible Walled City, a lawless labyrinth. Let's get right into it. You have to picture the massive, almost unbelievable contrast happening here. On the outside, you had 1990s Hong Kong, right? An absolute economic powerhouse full of gleaming wealth and towering skyscrapers. But right inside it, lurking in its heart, was Kowloon. It was this dark, sunless labyrinth. It was so dangerous and secretive that tourists were strictly banned from entering. You had butchers literally tossing dog meat into the streets, meaning residents had to carve their way through actual grime just to get to their front doors.
And to put the sheer density of this place into perspective, Kowloon was 7 times more densely populated than Dharavi. And Dharavi is the largest slum in all of Asia. 7 times.
Just wrap your head around this reality for a second. We're talking about an entire civilization of 33,000 people shoved into a space of about 6.5 acres. That's roughly the size of just 2 football fields. They were packed into 350 interconnected buildings that were essentially stacked on top of each other without a single engineer or blueprint involved. It was like a giant, terrifying puzzle. You could actually travel across the entire city without ever once touching the ground floor. Oh, and for all 33,000 of those people, they shared exactly one public water tap. One single tap for the whole city. Part 2. The Rule of Triads, a criminal empire. So, with no government, who was in charge? Well, a vicious criminal syndicate called the Triads acted as the absolute terrifying law of the land. And we're not just talking about a street gang here. This was a highly organized cult, split into 5 distinct factions. By 1990, they had an army of 52,000 members across Hong Kong, all operating out of the dark, twisted alleys of Kowloon. They controlled the brothels, the drug dens, the illegal gambling, the whole shebang. Every single one of the 1,000 businesses inside the walled city had to pay them a protection tax. You couldn't even buy or sell a tiny windowless apartment without getting their explicit permission first. To really grasp their psychological grip on the people, you just have to look at their blood oath initiation. New recruits would literally drink animal blood, take 36 binding vows, and then they had to answer this absolutely terrifying question. A sword would be pressed right against the recruit's neck, and they'd be asked, "Is the sword or your neck harder?" And they had to answer, "My neck." Once you took those vows, there was no going back. Betraying the gang didn't just mean death. It meant the promise that evil spirits would eternally torture you and your entire family. Part 3. Fear and Ghosts. Psychological control. Let's explore how that superstition actually worked. When mysterious deaths started spiking in the 1950s, investigators stumbled onto something wild. Gang members were actually way more terrified of ghostly vengeance than they were of the police. The American parapsychologist Professor Martin Eben actually researched this. He found a young Triad member named Hung Ping who was dying in a hospital from multiple stab wounds. His own father begged him on his deathbed to name his killers so his soul could finally rest in peace. But Hong Peng, even mere moments from death, completely refused. He kept his lips sealed tight because he was just too terrified of what the Triad's ghosts would do to his family. And this kind of extreme environment bred a textbook case of Stockholm Syndrome, heavily mixed with cult psychology. The oppressed literally viewed their torturers as their protectors. The Hong Kong police found it absolutely bizarre. I mean, despite this massive daily oppression, the residents didn't actually see themselves as victims. They thought of themselves as satisfied customers of the Triads because they genuinely believed the gangs were the only ones keeping the angry spirits at bay.
When escaping pain is impossible, the human mind does some incredible tricks. It justifies the abuse just to survive the horrific day-to-day reality. This superstition ran so deep that even highly educated people completely abandoned all logic just to appease these imaginary ghosts. Professor Ebon documented a friend of his, a literal philosophy professor, who discovered his own son had been recruited by the Triads to work as a pimp. When Ebon offered to connect him directly to the police, the professor actually refused. He truly believed his son was possessed by evil spirits and that only an exorcist could save him now. I mean, that is the true, terrifying power of the Triads. Absolute psychological domination. Part 4, Geopolitical Black Hole, a lawless loophole. So, you're probably wondering, why didn't anyone stop this? Well, if we trace the history back, we find the ultimate legal glitch that let the walled city completely fall through the cracks of international law. Way back in 1842, Britain won the First Opium War and took Hong Kong. So, China built walls around Kowloon just to stake their claim. Fast forward to 1898, Britain signs a 99-year lease on Hong Kong. Then, in 1947, the Chinese Civil War breaks out, and millions are fleeing famine and conflict. Suddenly, about 2,000 refugee families pour into this tiny walled-off space because it offered a very bizarre, specific kind of legal protection. It created this massive, paralyzing stalemate. Basically, China technically had the law, Britain controlled the gates, and therefore, literally nobody had the control. China owned the land on paper, but it sat physically right inside British Hong Kong. Neither side could legally send in police without violating international treaties and sparking a massive diplomatic incident. It was a pure governance black hole. And the refugees, and eventually the Triad gangs, exploited this loophole perfectly to build their safe haven.
Part 5, Secret Operation Yellow Bird, a covert alliance.
But here's where the story takes a really crazy turn. During the peak of the Cold War, Western intelligence desperately needed an untraceable, completely illegal backdoor into communist China, especially in 1989, following the horrible events at the Tiananmen Square massacre. Hundreds of student activists and dissidents were fleeing for their lives. Western powers wanted to extract them, but obviously they couldn't just walk through the front door. They needed a shadow network. And so a very dark alliance was born. The West actually funded the brutal anarchy in Kowloon to secretly rescue over 400 democratic activists. In a highly classified mission called Operation Yellowbird, the CIA and British MI6 partnered directly with some of the most dangerous Triad bosses, like a guy known as Brother Six. The Triads provided their speedboats, fake passports, and black market smuggling routes, and in exchange, the CIA and MI6 handed over funding and essentially provided total legal protection, turning a complete blind eye to the horrific crimes the gangs were committing. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they actively funded the anarchy in the walled city just to protect democracy abroad. Wild, right? Part 6. Erased from history, the ultimate cover-up. So what finally brought it down? Well, as the 99-year lease neared its end, Britain was getting ready to hand Hong Kong back to China. The walled city, which had been this sort of useful chaos for a while, suddenly became an extreme political embarrassment for both nations. So in the early 1990s, they handed out an astronomical 2.76 billion Hong Kong dollar compensation package just to quietly evict all 33,000 residents. In 1993, these two bitter global rivals suddenly shook hands and agreed to bury their mutual embarrassment straight into the dirt. Around 400 British officials descended on the city to distribute the funds, and riot police were sent in to forcibly clear out absolutely anyone who refused to leave. And then, within an incredibly short window, every single one of those 350 heavily packed, chaotic buildings was completely demolished, turned to dust. But the truly terrifying part is the cover-up that followed. They didn't just knock down the buildings, you guys. They completely deleted the evidence. This sounds like straight-up fiction, but it's a historical fact. Today, you will find practically zero official records of Kowloon Walled City in the British archives. You won't find a single artifact placed in Chinese museums. When the demolition was happening, photographers like the famous Greg Girard were strictly banned from the site. Cameras were smashed to pieces, and the media was heavily intimidated into total silence. They wanted it gone, completely erased. Why? Well, because geopolitics dictates that history is written by the victors. Keeping Kowloon alive in the history books would have completely destroyed Britain's civilized image. They'd have to admit they let a massive human rights graveyard flourish right inside their colony. And China? They just wanted a pristine Hong Kong handed back to them, with a totally clean slate, free of any messy history. So,
They both just deleted it. Which leaves us with a pretty chilling final thought about the truth we are actually allowed to see. The story of Kowloon Walled City isn't just about some densely packed slum or a criminal syndicate. It's really a mirror showing us exactly how geopolitics works behind closed doors. Sometimes, the greatest act of diplomacy is simply erasing the truth. So it really makes you wonder, if a sprawling city of 33,000 people can be deliberately wiped from human history to protect global empires, what else is missing from our archives? Thank you so much for walking through this incredible piece of hidden history with me today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.